good were you at karaoke?
I was a good singer. I like singing. The closest person that I sound like is Bon Jovi. We're very similar.
To match the voice, Jason's stage presence.
I would just try to basically be relaxed, and also, maybe make eye contact with people. Sometimes I would do this lasso thing, do some sort of silly thing like you're shooting a gun or something like that.
And what was this cowboy's choice of song that night?
Blaze of Glory. Bon Jovi was definitely, my favorite, especially Blaze of Glory. Wake up in the morning, I raise on you, yeah. Got no hope for no. And the earth was last night dead. Don't know where I'm going, only I know where I've been. I'm a devil on the run, a six-gun lover, a gambling win.
And at that moment, during that song, his eyes fell on two men in the audience.
The two guys were off in like a booth. They were dressed normally. They didn't look like, thugs or criminals or anything like that, and they were just sitting there.
But he didn't know during that song that these two men would, before the end of the night, savagely beat him, not only severely injuring him, but changing his brain in profound and almost unbelievable ways.
We sat down, and at some point, we paid our bill, and we left. We walked out of the bar, and as we left, the two guys got up behind us. I was just walking, and I heard as much as felt this deep, low-pitched thud as the first guy he ran up behind me and just smashed me in the back of the head. And I saw this puff of light, just like somebody took a picture. And then the next thing I knew, I was on my knees and everything was spinning and I didn't know where I was or how I got there. I've been trying to bite the guy on the inside of his leg because I was just getting punched and kicked. And he had these baggy pants on. And when I bit down and tried to bite up his leg, all I got was fabric and I cracked my front tooth and bit down so hard. The other guy that wasn't biting, he was punching and I think he kicked me in the kidney. That's what took it out of me. Strangely enough, the one thing I really remember is I with these guys before, and in the middle of it, Angela, who was standing there, just frozen, and her mouth was this little circle, like just a shock. And the guy that she was with on this first date, I remember looking at him and I said, "Help!" And I tried to duck a punch, and I said, "God damn it, help!" And he put his hands up in the air and turned around and walked away. Thinking, wow, I'm alone, and people pressed up against the window in a restaurant watching that, nobody did anything. One of them said, "Give me your goddamn jacket," and at that point I realized it was a robbery, and I just literally threw my jacket off, rolled away, and they grabbed it and ran off. This cheap little leather jacket at that point was torn up, going around the ground.
You were really savagely beaten, but still managed to stumble over to the hospital.
Yeah, it was right across the street, luckily.
And when you were at the hospital, what did they tell you about your diagnosis? Like what injuries you'd sustained?
They said I had a concussion and a bleeding kidney and a shot of pain medicine and sent me home.
What did you do after that? I mean, did you just continue on with your life?
OCD came on very quickly. I just became like a hermit.
Jason had sustained a traumatic brain injury, which can bring on obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. In Jason's case, he became increasingly afraid of the outside world.
I don't remember exactly what day it was, but I remember nailing blankets and towels over all the windows in the house and always wanting the wall to be behind me so I could see anybody that was approaching me. I remember using this spray foam, and I actually glued the front door shut. So the only way you could get in the house was through this weird shaped back door. And the front door, literally, you would have to cut it open with a hatchet to get in through it.
So you weren't coping emotionally?
Yeah, no, it was very dramatic.
But all the while, while Jason was experiencing all these negative, horrible consequences from his attack, something kind of incredible was happening too.
I would go through it again to get this.
The way Jason was seeing things changed.
Everything that was curved looked like it was slightly pixelated. Water going down the drain didn't look like this smooth flowing thing anymore. It looked like little tamp lines. We see these lines of waves crisscrossing each other and the boundaries of everything having these little pixelated edges.
Every time Jason would run water from a tap, he would stand watching, mesmerized by these lines, looking almost like a DNA helix spiraling down. And then he'd look out his window.
Clouds and sunlight coming through the trees. Clouds used to look like they were smooth, had curves on the circumference of the cloud, and now everything looks pixelated. I was surprised, confused. It was beautiful, but it was also scary at the same time.
Because of these visions, Jason would start thinking about huge questions about mathematics and physics.
Since everything was pixelated, everything that moved looked like it was moving relative to a grid, like a video game. And so it made me start thinking, if everything's moving relative to this grid, that certainly seems mathematical to me.
And so did you start thinking I need to research to figure out the things that I'm seeing?
Yeah, the internet really helped a lot just because I was able to look up things and stay home. I started reading about math.
And one webpage he stumbled across was about fractals. It's a complicated mathematical concept that you won't fully understand with a brief description. But basically, imagine a snowflake. You zoom in, and it's made of smaller snowflakes connected together. You zoom in again, and those snowflakes are made of smaller snowflakes, and you zoom in, and those snowflakes are made of even smaller connected snowflakes, and so on until infinity.
So it was one of the things that I noticed very quickly is that like every shape that I looked at, I could take it apart into the same shape. So just for instance, if I was looking at you, I could take you apart into a 1,000 little pictures of you. And if you put those 1,000 little pictures of you in the right space or the right places, I can make the exact same picture of you. And that's what a fractal is. A fractal is a shape that when you decompose it into pieces, the pieces are the same or similar to the whole. So if you think about a grid on the TV, it's little grids making a lot of squares, making larger and larger squares. And everything in the universe is a fractal. And I was dancing around this concept and seeing it, but still didn't quite have the words to describe it. And my daughter was watching TV. She asked me how the TV worked. And I said, well, little pixels change color, and as they change color, that changes the picture on the screen. And the commercial for Overstock.com came on, and it had a big circle. She goes, how do you make a circle with squares or with rectangles? And I was like, wait a second, you can't. So when you're looking at a TV screen, you see a circle. It's really not a circle because it's made with rectangles or squares. If you look in close, the edge of the circle is really a zigzag. And then you can take those pixels and cut them in half, and cut them in half, cut them in half, and you get closer and closer and closer to a perfect circle, but you never actually reach one because you can keep cutting pixels in half forever. So the resolution gets better, but you never have a perfect circle.
And so you wanted to draw this concept?
Yeah, so I drew it. I took a compass, and drew what looked like a circle, even though it's vibrating. If you look at the edge of it with a microscope, you'll see that what you draw as a circle really isn't a circle. It's got little waves and edges. But so I drew it and then inscribed squares in it. And the more and more I would draw smaller and smaller grid within the circle, the more I would approximate the circle, but I would never actually fully fill it in because there was always a little bit of empty space left over.
And how obsessive did you become with this idea of drawing these circles?
Yeah, I had literally probably 1,000 or more drawings of circles, fractals, every shape I managed to draw. And it was the only way I could communicate effectively what I was seeing. Like I would tell people, everything's made up of pieces of pie. And I didn't mean like pie, like, a pie or a cake, I meant like literally like little wedges, triangles. So I had to find a way to say it with layman terms, which is why I started drawing it.
But why did the world start looking so radically different to Jason? Why was he seeing mathematical formulas and structures everywhere? He still didn't have any answers. So you were during that time living on your own, boarded into your house, barely going out, spending all of your time drawing and researching. How long did you go on like that for?
It's about 3.5 years, 3 to 4 years. It was a long time. It seemed like a lifetime.
3 years. How did you continue on like that? How did no one say to you, look, get out of the house?
I became such a hermit, and then the only other person I really had contact with was my daughter.
And her mom didn't say anything?
Yeah, her mom and I, at the time, we were negotiating, custody, and so we really didn't talk personally.
It was a rare trip into the outside world that would break this cycle for Jason.
Yeah, so I wound up going to the mall and had a sandwich, and I had all my drawings, and I remember at the time I was like, these drawings hold the key to understanding the universe, and it turns out it does. But I thought they were so important, I was scared to leave them anywhere. So when I did leave, even to go get groceries, I would take my drawings with me, even though they were heavy. So I was at the mall, and I was eating a sandwich, and I was drawing. And this guy started talking to me, and he said, what are you doing there? It looks very mathematical. And I was like, oh, I'm trying to describe the discrete structure of space-time based on Planck length and quantum black holes. And he goes, this sounds like you're talking about high-level math and physics. And it turned out he was a physicist. He goes, have you ever thought about taking a math course? And I was like, no, I hadn't really thought about it, but you would think I would have, but I hadn't. And that's what I did. I went and enrolled in Math 99, just regular old algebra at Tacoma Community College.
At this point, Jason started getting psychological help for things, obsessive compulsive disorder. School really changed everything.
Not only was it teaching me how to describe things mathematically, but it also got me out of the house.
And it was also at college that Jason met the woman who would become his wife.
I was at school in the cafeteria drawing. She sat down and we just started talking to me. And she said her father was an engineer and used to do a lot of drafting. And we started talking. And I got up to her and asked her if she wanted to go out. And we went out on a date. And everything changed dramatically from that point. It was so much better.
But he still doesn't have the answers to why he's seeing the world in such a different way. Until one day, a clue in a television show.
When I saw the show, it had a savant on there named Daniel Tammet. And Daniel Tammet started talking about what numbers looked like to him. He was able to memorize pi to like 25,000 decimals and do extremely large calculations in his head. And he did it all visually. I would always describe that math was shapes, not numbers. And that was the first time I had heard anybody but me talk about what numbers look like.
Jason started searching on the internet. What's a savant? Numbers? What's synesthesia? His searches led him to some of the leading experts in the world, including Professor Berit Brogard. Berit, or Brit, is a Danish researcher, and her email signature reads like a tome. She is a professor at the University of Miami, a professor too at the University of Oslo, the director of the Brogard Lab for Multisensory Research, and has written multiple books, including The Superhuman Mind.
And I was able to get functional MRIs done with Berit Brogard in Finland.
Jason and Professor Brogard spoke over the phone for many hours, for many months, before the tests in Helsinki. From these discussions, they hypothesized that there were two things going on with Jason. First, he had synesthesia.
Yes, synesthesia is a mixing of the senses that is unusual.
It can happen with all the senses.
Yeah, we believe it can happen with all the senses in all kinds of cross-wiring ways that we haven't even seen or found yet.
Synesthesia is estimated to affect around 4% of the population. For some people, it's like when they hear music, they see colors in their mind.
Letters, numbers give rise to colors.
Or for some people, they have emotions that make them smell things that are not there. Or seeing someone makes them feel the same pain that they're seeing the other person experience. Why do some people have synesthesia and others don't?
Some people are synesthetes as a result of real structural changes to the brain.
Synesthetes have connections in the brain that others don't. You can be born this way, or some type of trauma, an injury, a stroke, an allergic reaction can change the brain. So basically they figured that Jason's brain injury from his attack caused him to have a form of synesthesia where certain things he saw made him either see a mathematical formula or geometric shape, either in his mind or projected in front of him. This leads to the second hypothesis, which is that the synesthesia made Jason something called an acquired savant. A savant is someone who has a special skill in a narrow field, in Jason's case, maths, and that he acquired this. He didn't or couldn't have had this skill before the attack and subsequent brain injury. To test these ideas, Professor Borgard was going to do something called a functional MRI. It's different from a regular MRI where you just sit still. In this case, you also get some sort of task that you have to do while sitting still in a room.
They put me in functional MRIs and they would flash hundreds of equations and then fake equations that weren't real, and then watch what part of my brain started to function when mathematical equations were presented. And they found that I had access to parts of the brain that we don't have conscious access to. And also, like, the visual cortex was working in conjunction with the part of the brain that does mathematics, which obviously makes sense.
So what was the diagnosis then?
They diagnosed me with acquired savant syndrome and a form of synesthesia.
And how did it feel to finally have an official diagnosis?
It was wonderful, because I questioned myself. Many times I was like, I've seen guys that are crazy, and they're on the other side of the road talking to themselves, and they don't know they're talking to themselves. To them, they're in whatever world they're in, and it's real. What if I'm this guy who thinks I see math everywhere, and I don't, and I'm wrong, because I didn't have the means to prove it.
Acquired savant and synesthete Jason Paget talking to Saskia Edwards. I'm just going to issue a traditional warning. Please do not hit yourself over the head in an attempt to become a genius. It is not a good idea. So with us, Outlook will be back after the news.
This is the BBC World Service. Now take a moment to listen to this.
Commitment
I love my community, I love my religion. It's a way of life for me.
and determination.
There wasn't a way to give up. What am I going to say when I go back? I couldn't be. I gave up. No.
Feelings of unease.
The killing was so much, it couldn't walk during the day. So we were spending all the time in the bush hiding.
Or loss.
They've just lost their best friend, their relatives. They have to make this trip to make their final ways come true.
The news coming up on the World Service. The world's my station, birds are rated for is a bit immature. A bit immature on there, their jokes. And it's more serious, it's more that station.
It means I don't know anywhere in the world.
To listen, go to bbcworldservice.com.
Very informative, very good. Yeah, I found it.
Next on Outlook, more stories of how we see the world and how the world sees
I can get
us.
radio for that.
To Namibia in part 2 to meet Helena Ndume, who has the wonderful job of restoring people's sight.
I always say that nobody in this world can pay the price of the joy of someone who have been blind for so many years and then suddenly they could see again.
The woman they call Dr. Miracle after the news.
Harry Smith. Thousands of Iraqi militiamen have attacked the American embassy in Baghdad and at US airstrikes on their forces.
You outside?
A guard tower was set ablaze, and some of the crowd are reported to have managed to penetrate the compound before tear gas was fired to try to disperse them.
You're not coming in?
Renault Nissan Carlos Ghosn has fled Japan, where he was in trial on charges of financial misconduct.
I'll wait up then, I'll wait up.
Lebanon. He said he would no longer be held hostage by what he called a rigged system of justice in Japan. A court in Angola has ordered the seizure of assets and bank accounts belonging to Isabel dos Santos, who is the daughter of the former president, who is often described as Africa's richest woman. Ms. dos Santos has been accused of involvement in the theft of $1 billion worth of state assets. She has recently denied wrongdoing. The Greek authorities say 8 crew members of a Greek-registered oil tanker have been abducted from their vessel off the coast of West Africa. The Happy Lady was anchored just off Cameroon when it was stormed by armed men on Monday night. A former political leader from Ivory Coast, Chablé Goudé, has been sentenced in absentia to 20 years in prison for murder, rape and torture. In 2010, he controversially recruited and armed thousands of young men into a militia. at the time when Ivory Coast was on the brink of civil war. New Year celebrations have kicked off with the city of Auckland in New Zealand providing a spectacular show. The first to usher in 2020 were the residents of Kiribati in the Western Pacific. Large crowds have gathered for a faraway display in Australia's biggest city, Sydney, where the air is hazy from bushfires. And those are the latest stories from BBC News.
Hello, I'm Jo Fidgen, and you're with Outlook, the 2020 edition. Stories about sight and clear-sightedness, how we see the world and how the world sees us. That last point became hugely important to British scientist Dr. Kate Stone after a rather dramatic night out. It was New Year's Eve, actually, 2013, and she was celebrating with friends in a small village in Scotland. The drink was spring, it was feeling warm inside. Outside, it was cold and wet, and something dangerous was lurking in the undergrowth.
It was our last night, and we'd gone to have a drink in the only pub in the place. And there was a ceilidh, which is like a mix of local people playing music. So it was drinking Guinness, singing, and listening to music, and drinking whiskey. And then it got to midnight, and then the place was closing. And we all still felt jolly, and wanted to carry on. And the musicians said, we usually carry this on in a shed at the bottom of someone's garden that they've turned into a small music studio and a place where they drink more whiskey. So did we want to come along?
And you said?
I said, yeah, of course. And one of my problems is I don't know how to say no, so I generally say yes to everything and see where adventure takes me. And it was kind of like the Pied Piper, where you just like follow these people along the dark road.
No lights.
So I had a few flashlights because I didn't have. And then this main road knew where they were going, and they started to disappear into the darkness ahead. And my friends started to fall behind a little bit, and it turns out that one of them had dropped something.
And they had the lights.
They had the lights, I had no light. So my position west. And then literally didn't know what hit me. And then bang, I felt a second thud, but my memory is of 2/3.
Both in your chest.
Yeah, something big just hit me. No idea what it was. And then I fell to the floor and quickly became aware that there was a hole in my neck.
How big was this hole in your neck?
I don't remember having a sense of how big it was, but I knew that when I tried to speak, it came out as a gurgle. And I tried to scream and shout for my friends. And I think they thought I was joking, and that's what they told me later. And then my friends came to my side. I'm going to die. It's okay. I'm happy for what I've done and the choices that I've made. And all I have to do now is to just enjoy another breath of life. Because there's still life ahead of me, whether it's a few breaths or many breaths. And so all my focus was on just breathe in one more time, slowly as I can.
You didn't see what hit you,
No.
but there was a theory about what had happened.
Yeah, this huge stag. And then someone had not realised that the stag was in the garden, and they'd closed the gate. So then when we came back, the locals opened the garden gate.
I'm coming.
We were trapped in the garden, terrified, and had stampeded out. This is what everyone's assumed happened. And the next day, when people had gone to look, there was hoof prints in the wet soil where that had happened. No one saw the stag, but it left its mark on the ground and on me.
What damage had it actually done?
So the antler went into my throat at the front. It went through my trachea, through my esophagus, and it stopped 2 millimeters before my spinal cord.
What would happen if it hit your
I'd be
spinal
dead.
cord?
Yeah, and also they said 2 millimeters left, or it would have severed a major artery, and I'd also be dead. It was just like a perfect tracheotomy, what the doctors do to open someone's airway.
Kate was in surgery for hours. Her throat was reconstructed and she was put into an induced coma to make sure she didn't move while the wounds were healing. Meanwhile, the British newspapers had picked up on the story of this incredibly rare event, a stag goring someone in the neck. But when they found out who the victim was, they chose to see Kate and what had happened to her in a very particular way. Kate was unaware of all of this for some weeks. She focused all her attention on resting and had deliberately avoided her phone. But when she was well on the road to recovery, she decided to get out the papers.
This one's at the bass sound because the bass was too quiet. And this is the vocal mic. So now whoever's doing vocals has to come up here. Right?
Shocking.
Yeah, it's on the
Newspapers.
Yeah, this is the worst thing, is having to.
No, line up a nice to go one minute, Johnny.
What do you want?
Line up a nice
10.
Scottish newspapers.
I might have to wait until Scarface gets here.
You ain't got no more now?
I'll have a look and see what I can do.
Even for 5, it may be 5 or 5.
Alright.
Yeah, so the thing is, I'm transgender. I kind of got to the point where it's really not that big a deal. You know, I'm a scientist, I have some children, I run a business, and being transgender is as irrelevant as my hair colour, shoe size. It's not a big deal. But 6 of the biggest newspapers in the UK, they disclose personal details that they suddenly found it's a forum to put former name, dates of operation, trying to get interviews about me being transgender with friends and family. You know, just things that are totally irrelevant. I was gored by a stag, almost died, I left it to hospital, and had somehow survived. And that's a really sensational story.
What most offended you about those headlines?
I think the thing is what they do sets a tone and a precedent for what an everyday person can do in the street. If I walk down the street and someone happens to think or assume that I'm transgender, they do not have the right to walk over to me and shout in my face, "You're transgender, you're a sex swap scientist." That's not how you label someone. If they write that in capital letters on the front page of the newspaper, they are shouting to millions of people that it's okay to identify someone by what makes them different before something that's happened in their life and that is of interest. There's so much bigger. And it just shocked me for what that's going to do to anybody else, and the fear it's going to strike into other people's hearts.
What's so interesting is that it strikes me that you're not sensitive about your gender identity. You're at ease with it. You don't have an issue with it at all. I love the story where you talk about how you came out to your colleagues.
Yeah.
Will you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I mean, that's quite a few years ago. So I had to tell my colleagues in the place that I was working with, we sit around the lunch table every day, and it's all guys, and I said, so there's something I have to tell you. I'm transgender, and I'm going to start coming to work dressed as a woman. And one person looked up and then looked at another person and said, "Can you pass the ketchup, please?"
They just weren't going to engage with that.
It's like, oh, okay, I need some ketchup right now. And anyway, the next day, or what felt like the next day, I sat around the table and I said, "Guys, there's something I need to tell you. I decided to become vegetarian."
I'm running a bit low.
The looks on everyone's faces.
Come on, 1 gram.
You're not going to eat meat. How are you going to eat? How are you going to survive? You know.
You got a pound then?
Bought this food.
That look good.
That's how it should be. It isn't that big a deal. I want to be a role model. Just so happen to be trans.
So you decided to write to these newspapers, these 6 newspapers, and the things they've written about you. What's unusual perhaps is that you didn't get angry. The letters you wrote were very calm.
Yeah.
Why?
So my spiritual reaction immediately to this, I was furious. And I was very hateful of journalists. You know, at that time would say I was bigoted towards any journalist and I would not want to speak to anyone, BBC included. And then I realised, maybe you have a moment of an angry response to someone where you say,
This is musical Heatwave. My friend Norman Station is from Jamaica.
I thought you'd like it.
Yeah, man. You know how we like that. You know that Rasta music.
Yeah.
I got that small one.
The King Size Vista.
Yeah, come on, people. Oh, yeah, this is small one.
Yeah. That's Norman, that's him. He runs the station. That's my social worker.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Why you don't give him a music like
I have done his paper, he's played it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I never know you did that. I didn't know that man had already said that. I didn't know he had already said that too.
Yeah. You know Norman, didn't you? You seen him come in?
I think I saw him one time, but I remember you talked to him so many times on the phone while I'm sitting here, and I'm like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so Johnny, that's what we need, man. Yeah, man. You see, Europe, a long time before you come to England. I heard that Europe, they support reggae music.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
They do, yeah.
Yeah. And if I could get a break here, trust me. That would be good.
Well, you're in the right place. We just got to promote ourselves.
Johnny, you see me, man. You know, you see how me work already. Now, sometimes it's like once I'm in the vibes and I'm in the mood, it's like when I start doing vocal, like I don't want to stop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And once I'm out there, bro, I'm out there. Trust me. And once my shit start playing on the radio and people like it, before you know it, by next week, they hear another new track from us tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And another one again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Let's start used to my
I think what you really need to do, Max, to get your money, let's start touring. I'll give you the instrumentals, and you have to get a DJ, like Junior or someone. Just get someone to DJ, take it in turns, MCing and DJing. Maybe you DJ yourself.
Yeah.
And all you gotta do is put the instrumental on and then rap over the top. You do it on stage, and then that's how you get your money, by doing gigs. That's how you get your money. My DJ, he's DJ in Brighton, getting £500 for the night, he's giving me £200.
Sean Kane, thank you very much.
It's DJ Vinci if you want.
Jackie.
But you're a vocalist, so you
I'm a vocalist, man. I can DJ too, but I'm more into the vocal. I feel like that's me. I could just sit back in a chair like this. I could just one fucking stage like this and make me move and lay a couple of tracks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then before you know it, I'm calling and I'm out. This one I'm gonna have a carry a split for a game, my missus got all her son, you know. I have a big son in the 20, 19, 20, now, 20 September. Last night, they tell me you got no weed. I said, I ain't got none either. I just snuck my last bit. Tell me, get that drive, get that split, I'm going to give my split, you know? I might go give it one out of this one.
Loving you is simple.
I'm not gonna say yes, but you have to ask now, you know what I'm
That still picks up your vocals, you know. Still picks up your vocals from there, a little quietly, yeah. When we're doing Battle with Minds tonight, you'll be anywhere in the room will pick up the vocals.
Send it to your friend. Send it to your friend. Could also become a friend, but send it to them. Everyone that sees is everyone that knows. Because my love getting higher. Every sun that sets, every sun that rises.
and it is my brother Raymond.
Be like the wind on my own neck shore. Because the heart sleeps take time. Loving you is easy. Cause the way you make me. Loving you is simple. That's the way it's supposed to be. Baby, when you're by my side, I feel so young and free. I can love you on and on and on and on. On and on and on.
You want to do a show then, or what? Or you just chilling out?
Yeah, I'm gonna chill for a minute. What did you say was gonna do a show? 4 o'clock?
Huh?
4 o'clock?
You do that too, if you want. Fine.
About
Loving you is simple. It must be best to be.
You can do the 12 till 2 if you want.
I've been loving you for you, but you love me.
I'm going to change it over.
You've been loving on and on and on and on. On and on and on.
You want to hear what we did last night?
Yeah, you do that.
So put that on. Wait a minute, let me just finish this. Sounds really good, I really like it.
Yeah.
Because my love takes high. Every sun that shines, every sun that shines, every moon that shines. Be like the wind on my own neck shore. Because the water sleeps take pride. And loving you is easy. You must be made for me. Loving you is simple. It comes naturally. Woman, you're by my side. I feel so young and free. I can love you on and on and on and on. On and on and on. On and on and on and on. 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 Love is everything. Love keeps going on. Love is you forever. Love keeps going strong. I love the way you play it. Ooh, la, la, la. I wanna talk to you for a while. Ooh, la, la, la. I love the way you play it. Ooh, la, la, la. I need you in my mood tonight. Let's go for a walk. Down by the riverside. Let's go for a ride. Take you to the mountainside. Girl, baby, give me your hand. And I will take the lead. We can talk about the different tree. I like to give you a ooh, la, la, la. I love the way you
I'll put on what we made last night, alright?
I wanna talk to you for a while. Ooh, la, la, la. I love the way you smile. Ooh.
Daddy. Hello? Yeah, you know. Yeah, I'm just talking about it. Everything bless man, there man. There already man was talking about yeah. One is so ready now. Alright. Junior. Where you going? Yeah, it's there. We're saying alright. I run over my yard. I bring my boy a street. I get that out there with and then we move to it. You know what I mean? Okay. I'm going to come back in like 20 minutes. Alright. Just go there and touch them. Alright. You recording this there, Johnny?
Refinish that. Something to be done.
Yeah, I can do it now.
That's what I'm But Andy, yeah.
Monty, dance floor. That's the way to go.
Iraqi militiamen tried to storm the US embassy in Baghdad in response to American airstrikes on their forces. 2 more die in Australia's bushfires as the military's brought in.
Nothing prepares you for that bearing down of a fire front charging at a community. We're talking massive walls of fire coming straight at you.
We'll learn more about the cold spell gripping parts of India. The former Nissan boss Carlos Ghosn, who's facing trial, flees Japan for Lebanon. And the Greeks swapping New Year clubs for classes.
Instead of going and spank, I prefer to go to a dance class, have some good time. For me, this is a psychotherapeutic procedure.
All coming up on the newsroom. First, the news update.
BBC News. Hello, I'm Jerry Smith. Thousands of Iraqi militiamen, angry at recent US airstrikes on their forces, have attacked the American embassy in Baghdad. President Trump has accused Iran of orchestrating the violent protest. Our Middle East analyst Alan Johnston reports.
Ranks of militiamen converged on the embassy compound. They chanted anti-American slogans, flung stones, and then columns of black smoke began rising above the scene. A guard tower had been set alight. Dozens of protesters forced open the door and managed to enter the compound before forces defending it fired tear gas to try to disperse them. There's been high tension since US airstrikes on Sunday killed at least 25 members of an Iranian-backed Iraqi militia group.
The former head of Renault Nissan, Carlos Ghosn, has jumped bail in Japan and fled the country. Mr. Ghosn, who was facing financial misconduct, is now in Lebanon, where he has citizenship. He said he was escaping injustice and political persecution.
Right.
Route is Quentin Somerville.
Although born in Brazil, Carlos Ghosn is one of Lebanon's sons. His grandfather emigrated from here.
New Year's Eve, 31st of December 2019.
And he's even been spoken about how seriously as a possible.
What New Year's ambitions have you got?
It's thought he entered.
I want to grow the music business, try and get some money in.
By private jet from Istanbul on Sunday evening. Lebanon receives millions in aid from Japan, but despite his recent legal troubles, Carlos Ghosn is still seen as one of its most successful businessmen. Lebanon won't up easily.
A court in Angola has ordered the seizure of assets and bank accounts belonging to Isabel dos Santos, the daughter of the former president. Ms. dos Santos, who lives abroad, has been accused of involvement in the theft of $1 billion worth of state assets. She denies wrongdoing. Andrew Harding has more details.
The court order was read out on state television in Angola, a powerful gesture in a country where for decades the Dos Santos family had seemed untouchable. But 2 years ago, President Eduardo Dos Santos stepped down, and to the surprise of many, his successor turned against the family, promising a major crackdown on corruption. Since then, billions of dollars in stolen assets have been recovered from abroad. Another Dos Santos relative is already on trial.
A former political leader from Ivory Coast, Charles Blé Godet, has been sentenced in absentia to 20 years in prison for murder, rape and torture. Earlier this year, he was cleared of crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court, but is still in The Hague pending a possible appeal. Blé Godet is a former youth minister. You're listening to World News from the BBC. The Indian state of Kerala has passed a resolution demanding the scrapping of a new citizenship law that has triggered protests across the country. It's the first state to challenge the policy of the Indian government in this way. Protesters in Hong Kong have held rallies in shopping malls in the territory, urging people not to give up the fight for democracy in the new year. Demonstrators are expected to form human chains at major sites where the New Year countdown will take place. Thousands of police have been deployed. John Ed is in the main shopping centre, Chim Cha Shui.
Normally, one of the busiest shopping districts in Hong Kong, it's relatively quiet at the moment. It's also the place where usually the biggest New Year celebrations and fireworks take place. That'll be a lot more low-key today. These police here are expecting protesters here in the next 2 to 3 hours. There have been brief scuffles in other parts of Hong Kong already this evening, a number of arrests. The police have made it clear they are going to try and stop all the disruptions, but inevitably, with such a big police presence, with the anxiety over Hong Kong still unappeased.
My Facebook account got shut down.
Not so many people around.
I'm not bothered. I'm going to email and YouTube from now on. Fuck Facebook. Facebook cunts, man.
The country's president to release her son. Eric Caballero was arrested in August, and his trial on charges of money laundering, tax evasion.
I might let me on my account back one day, but that's what I did see.
Human rights groups believe he's been framed. Caballero is 81.
I don't know why the authorities have shut down my account. Why they shut down my account?
Australia's biggest city, Sydney, has gone ahead with its famous fireworks display to see the new year, despite calls for the money to be used to help tackle raging wildfires. Earlier, celebrations of the arrival of 2020 kicked off in nations in the Western Pacific, including a show in Newport. BBC News.
Hello, you're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. I'm Nick Comation. We start the programme in Iraq, where thousands of angry protesters have been trying to storm the American embassy in the capital, Baghdad. The protesters, most of them militiamen, were enraged by US airstrikes. 20 members of a pro-Iranian militia were killed. Our Middle East Alan Johnston told me what was happening.
You mentioned US airstrikes in Iraq at the weekend, and they killed a number of Iraqi militiamen. Some of those militiamen were being buried this morning in Baghdad. You can imagine those would have been emotionally fraught events. After the funerals, ranks of militiamen, thousands of them, began to march towards the US Embassy in the heart of the city. It's located in the green zone, a heavily defended area, but these marchers seem to be pretty much waved through the checkpoint, suggesting a degree of official blessing for this protest. As the marchers converged on this substantial compound, they were throwing stones, chanting anti-American slogans. Soon there were columns of black smoke rising above the scene. A guard tower on an outer wall had been set on fire. We understand that one door had been forced open. Some protesters had gone into the compound, and we believe that at that point, American Marines defending the building by tear gas and reports of efforts by march organisers to try to disperse people as well.
So it seems anger is growing.
Well, this all goes back to a really serious development on Sunday when the US struck at an Iranian-backed Iraqi militia group called Hezbollah. The Americans hitting them in 5 places, killing at least 24, wounding dozens more. The Americans saying that this was in response to attacks by this group on bases in Iraq that are used by the American military. Of course, the militiamen are furious. They talked about taking revenge, and we've seen some of that anger being channeled into the heart of Baghdad and around the embassy compound as we speak.
We're not sticking to the programme today. Today we're doing a New Year's Eve special. All day we're doing a New Year's Eve special. Hopefully we've got that small red light in 2 o'clock. Hope we have the...
He's now in Lebanon, one of the countries where he has citizenship. His lawyer, Jim Hiramaka, was asked whether he had really witnessed Adona's characterization of the Japanese legal system as unjust.
It's not that I agree, but I understand why Mr. Goen thinks that way. From the manner in which he was arrested at the beginning, the way evidence was gathered, the way he was interviewed, and the way the evidence was then released, I can understand from his perspective why he wasn't content.
The lawyer also described the news of Mr. Goen's departure as a bolt from the blue, saying the legal team held all his 3 passports. So how did he get out of Japan? Question from our correspondent in Tokyo, Rupert Wingfield Hayes.
It is a huge embarrassment for the Japanese government. Mr. Goen was a very high-profile figure. His whole arrest, detention, and him being charged with multiple counts of financial misdeeds has been a leading news story throughout the last year or more here in Japan. And he was supposed to be under very close observation at his rented home in Tokyo with closed-circuit television cameras. He had surrendered all 3 of his passports, we understand, to his lawyer, who says he still has them in his possession. He had posted around, I think now they're saying around $12 million US in bail money. And so the idea that he could just sort of walk out of his house, go to an airport, get on a plane and leave without anybody stopping him seems fairly astonishing.
How on earth then did he get out?
Well, he must have had some help. One supposes he must have had new documentation of some sort. He may have had a new passport provided by somebody. He may have a different name in that passport. It's hard to tell, but also, he's a very well-known face. Everybody in Japan knows what Mr. Carlos Ghosn looks like, so you'd think that would be difficult. But it is assumed that he went to an airport, maybe not a major airport, maybe a minor airport, where people are less expecting to be dealing with wanted fugitives, and he managed to get a plane somewhere out of Japan.
Why has he gone to Lebanon?
Lebanon is one of his homes. It's where he grew up. He is a Lebanese citizen. His wife is a Lebanese citizen. He has a house there. He is something of a national sort of folk hero in Lebanon, where he is held up as this role model of a Lebanese person who has achieved real international success, global status. He has many, many friends and allies. Crucially, Lebanon does not have a extradition agreement with Japan, so it is beyond the reach of the Japanese prosecutor's office.
Rupert Wingfield Hayes. Of a huge firework display at Sydney Harbour as Australians welcome in the new year. But as the celebrations are happening, thousands of people in southeastern Australia have been forced to flee their homes after having trapped by advancing bushfires. In New South Wales, 2 people have been killed and dozens of properties destroyed. Down in Victoria, 4,000 holidaymakers and residents crowded onto the shorefront, preparing to flee into the ocean as a last resort. David Jeffrey runs a small hotel in Malakuta in East Gippsland. He described what happened as the fire bore down on the community.
Nothing prepares you for that bearing down of a fire front charging at a community. We're talking massive walls of fire coming straight at you. Everyone ready to dive into the water if it got here, and thank God we didn't get the fireballs hitting us here. We would have had mass casualties.
Our correspondent Phil Mercer has given me an update and started by saying the military have been brought in.
We understand that Black Hawk helicopters and those heavy lifting Chinook helicopters, as well as Navy ships, will be involved in supporting the firefighting effort, bringing food and supplies and power to those isolated communities such as Malakuta. And they also could be involved with the evacuation of people who have been forced to the ocean, forced to the beach to escape flames, similar to those 4,000 people in Malakuta who crowded around the waterfront to escape those flames that were bearing down on that community that's about 500 miles to the east of Melbourne. So the military has been involved in Australia's bushfire crisis in previous weeks, but this is an escalation in the military effort, and it just shows how very serious this situation is.
Of course, too late for so many communities destroyed by these fires. Is the government under any kind of pressure how it's dealt with what's going on?
It's under more pressure regarding the broader issue of climate change. The Prime Minister here is a man called Scott Morrison. He was criticised a few weeks ago for being away during the crisis. He was on holiday with his family in Hawaii. He came back, he apologised.
Alright, we're going to talk about the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages is the time in your history between ancient times. It's also known as the medieval period, from the Latin word medium. Let's start this again, hang on a minute. Greetings, the English fundamentalism. The Middle Ages, resident in the invaders. The Middle Ages is the between the modern times. The period is also known as the Middle Period. This is a slide count. One, two. One, two, mic check. Check, right. The Middle Ages is the time. Right, Middle Ages, raiders and invaders. The Middle Ages is the time in European history between ancient and modern times. The period is also known as the medieval period, from the Latin word medium, middle, and avum, age. Early in the Middle Ages, Western European civilization went through a period of upheaval and chaos as a succession of Germanic tribes surged through the former Roman Empire. Meanwhile, the rise of Islam in the Near East gave birth to a dynamic and warlike culture, which gradually spread into southern and northern Europe. Elsewhere, powerful empires and highly developed civilizations prospered in Asia and the Americas. By the late Middle Ages, the increased power of European kings and the civilizing forces of the Christian Church helped Europe recover from centuries of invasion, lawlessness, and economic breakdown. Right, 1066, William of Normandy conquers England. 1218 to 1224, Genghis Khan's Mongols reach southeast Europe. The Vikings were traders and warriors from Scandinavia who raided and later settled in parts of northern Europe between the 9th and 11th centuries. The Vikings believed in many gods. The most important who was Odin. Odin's son, Thor, was the god of thunder and war. Thursday, Thor's Day, is named after him. The Norman conquest. The Normans were descended from Vikings who had settled in northern France in 1066. Their leader, Duke William, invaded England to seize the throne from King Harold. The English were routed at the Battle of Hastings, but William became king. After his invasion, William the Conqueror consolidated his rule by crushing any revolts by English rebels. The Domesday Book. In 1085, William the Conqueror introduced to England, recording the names of landowners, their holdings, and how much their possessions were worth. The survey was called the Domesday Book. Right, that'll do for now. Well, I'm certainly looking forward to tonight. Go forward. Build it and they will come. I do love this studio. The studio is brilliant. I have so much fun in here. It's I never knew that I would be doing this when I was a little boy. This didn't even exist. Broadcasting television and radio from home, online, on a YouTube. I never knew that you could do this. It wasn't possible when I was a little boy. All we had was cassettes. That's all we had. There was video cassettes as well. Video, audio, TDK, CD90, whatever it was. C90. One, two. That's better. Alright, should we put some music on? Or should we put Radio World Service back on? Let's see. Just put the World Service on and see what's happening.
Well, I think if the guy will be breathing a huge sigh of relief because they've thrown the case out. Mr. Vega has to pay the costs. The court did indeed also strike out the Michelin guides claim that they wanted €30,000, €30,000, I beg your pardon, in damages against Monsieur Vega because they had failed to prove that it was in any way a malicious prosecution. But what the guide said was that if Monsieur Vega had won, then it would chill the effect of criticism. They said, who would dare write anything nasty about anybody if they were subject to revealing the precise details of their workings.
All right, many thanks indeed, Mike Sanders. Jerry's here with some other stories from our business.
The Greek authorities say 8 crew members of a Greek oil tanker have been abducted from a vessel off the coast of West Africa. The Foreign Ministry in Athens says the ship, the Happy Lady, was anchored in Cameroon, port of Limbo, where it was stormed by armed men on Monday night. Of the 28 crew, 5 Greeks, 1 Filipino, and a Ukrainian national. 1 person was injured. A man has appeared in court in London charged with criminal damage in connection with an attack on a Picasso painting. The incident happened last Saturday at Tate Modern. Our arts correspondent Colin Patterson reports.
The Magistrates' Court heard that Pablo Picasso's 1941 painting, Bust of a Woman, was torn during attack on Saturday. The work, which has been valued at £20 million.
Yes, the market's loud enough.
Girlfriend, Dora Maar, wearing a multicoloured hat and green clothing. It was completed in Paris in May 1944 during the final months of the occupation. Tate says the painting is now with their conservation team to assess the extent of any damage done to it. Shaquille Massey from North London.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Here at Inner London.
1, 2.
Has told Washington to give US diplomats history lesson after the US ambassador in Warsaw back to in an escalating row about the Second World War. Russia's deputy speaker, Vyacheslav Volodin, accused Ambassador George.
Today we're going to smoke all day. We've got enough money today.
She tweeted that Hitler and Stalin colluded to start the war. She said Poland was a victim. Mr. Volodin said ignorance or distortion of history was unacceptable from the representative of the country.
So contact the studio, let us know what you're doing in the new year, what plans you've got.
Authorities in the Indian city of Ayodhya have proposed 5 possible sites for the rebuilding of a mosque at the centre of a major sectarian dispute. The 16th century building was demolished by Hindu hardliners in 1992, sparking communal riots across India in which hundreds of people died. The Indian Supreme Court ruled last month that the district should be given to build a temple. The court said another plot must be found in the city to rebuild the destroyed mosque.
Thank you, Jerry. The Christmas and New Year season is, of course, party season, and in Greece, like other places, going up means going public. During the running economic crisis that has hit the young particularly hard, with youth unemployment close to 40%, Greeks are increasingly choosing a cheaper and much Greeker option. John Lawrence in Athens has investigated.
Several dozen men and women dancing in the streets. The neighbours' shoulders circle dance several centuries old. Drivers take one look and go and find an alternative route. It's well past midnight, many people at work or school tomorrow, but it was several hours ago that the dance spilt out from the little bar where the band is playing, and they don't look like stopping anytime soon. This is a new thing in Athens.
Yes, I don't swear very, very often. It's my entertainment. We listen to the violin and it's like a national brand.
As Kostas Makris and Grigori Papaiwan, both students, why dancing like their ancestors is getting so popular now.
For sure now people go back to the cultural, that's everything we have. No, economical stuff is going to kill. It's so bad here. We have to go out, dance a lot, and enjoy the life. It's the way we live now.
Maybe due to the financial crisis, because with few money we dance, instead of the clubs that maybe you need 5 times more. But when you listen to these music that your grandfather and your father was dancing in the weddings or the festivals, and you start dance with them, you feel like you're in the home.
Professor Maria Koutsouba, who is at Athens University, where we teach future PE teachers how to teach Greek dancing. She's also researched the subject.
What came out from the research that we have done, there were people because we didn't want to pay psychologists. So instead of going and paying, I prefer to go to a dance class, have some good time, talk to people who have similar problems with me, For me, this is a psychotherapeutic procedure.
It's sad and frustrating that although we can read ancient Greek philosophy, poetry, and the world's first novels and theatre, we can't hear their music, as the ancient Greeks had no musical notation. And we can only guess that the dances are inspired by the paintings and vases. We don't know, therefore, if the dances they danced in the streets of Greece now were the ones they danced in the time.
They're talking about ancient Greece.
What we do know is that for the past few hundred years at least, these dances have been passed down from generation to generation. The dancer, so they say in Greece, writes his soul on the ground with his steps. John Lawrenson with that report for us from Athens. Before we go, a reminder of our main news. Crowds of demonstrators have attacked the American embassy in Baghdad during the protest against US airstrikes on an Iraqi militia group last Sunday. You've been listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. I'm Nick Corration. Thanks very much indeed for your company.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, the world's radio station. And now, here's a look back at 2019 podcasts. A world of wonder.
That's just crazy, the presence of neighbors of that around the home.
Moments of joy.
What you should see now is a cloud.
No way. A world of drama.
You don't have to be afraid now. Look at us.
And life too.
This is maybe the first deal of animals we have in almost 48 years.
Amazing stories.
Hugs, squeeze me, okay?
From all over our sphere.
There's nothing that you can't do in this world if you set your mind to it.
Children's Weekend. Next year. Podcasts from the BBC World Service. Search for BBC World Service wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to the BBC World Service with me, Matthew Davis. Coming up in Business Daily, we look at phosphorus, the element that's essential to agriculture, food security, and frankly, life on this planet. One African country has an abundance of it. And as is so often with the world's resources, there's a geopolitical issue. That's all after the latest world news.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. Thousands of Iraqi militiamen have attacked the American embassy in Baghdad in anger at US airstrikes on their forces. Some of the crowd reportedly broke into the compound before tear gas was fired to try to disperse them. President Trump tweeted that he believed Iran was behind the assault. The former boss of Nissan, Carlos Ghosn, who's fled to Lebanon after jumping bail in Japan, says he was escaping injustice and political persecution. Mr. Ghosn, who is facing financial misconduct charges, Japan are running a rigged justice system. Tokyo is facing awkward questions about how he was able to escape to Lebanon, his childhood home. A court in Angola has ordered the seizure of assets and bank accounts belonging to Isabel dos Santos, the daughter of the former president. She is often described as Africa's richest woman. Ms. dos Santos, who lives abroad, has been accused of inventing the theft of $1 billion worth of state assets. She denies wrongdoing. Australia's biggest city, Sydney, has gone ahead with its famous fireworks display to see in the new year. Despite calling for money to be used to help tackle the raging wildfire.
I'm coming down.
Common, which has seen 6 months of anti-government protests, there were rallies urging people not to give up the fight for democracy in 2020. The authorities in Indian administered Kashmir say they're restoring text messaging services to the region from midnight, the start of the new year. Communications have been severely restricted since Delhi removed Kashmir's autonomous status in August, sparking widespread anger. And a former political leader from Ivory Coast, Charles Blé Goudé, has been sentenced in absentia to 20 years in prison for murder, rape and torture. He controversially recruited and armed thousands of young men into a militia. BBC News.
Hello, I'm Matthew Davis. Welcome to Business Daily from the BBC. Coming up, the element that's essential for fertilizers, growing crops, and, well, basically life itself.
It's extremely important. It's an element that is necessary for life, and it's essential for growing of crops. We cannot do without it.
We're talking about phosphorus today. You can't make it, and mostly
Over here,
it's
Scarface.
mined out of the earth. And one African country has by far the largest reserves of it, Morocco. But there's a legal and geopolitical issue at play as well.
Growing civil society movements have found that this legal question involving phosphates is a major subject, and it will continue to be a matter of serious debate globally.
Find out more in Business Daily from the BBC. There's something on the menu at every restaurant. It's in every recipe and part of everything we eat.
Like next week, hopefully I'm going to announce on Tuesday or Wednesday.
Without it, there would be no DNA, no cell membranes, no plants, no animals, and basically no us. It's the 11th most common element on Earth. It's phosphorus.
It's extremely important. It's an element that is necessary for life, and it's essential for growing of crops. We cannot do without it.
Professor Stuart White is the director at the Institute of Sustainable Futures at the University of Technology in Sydney.
And it doesn't exist in a gaseous or liquid form the same way that nitrogen does. We can fix nitrogen in the air through legumes. We can manufacture nitrogen through the
Right, awesome. I might come tonight. Yeah, come tonight. You know, even if you just fly through. Yeah, I will.
Right, after 7, yeah. Population of agriculture is so important, then phosphate mining is and will be as important as something like oil.
Absolutely. In some ways, you could argue more important because oil can be and is being substituted as we speak through electrification of vehicles, and we'll see that progress over the next years. Phosphorus cannot be substituted or manufactured, so we only have the resources that are currently in the Earth's crust, so we need to make sure that we recover and recycle those in order to ensure we have, as well as conserve, so improve the efficiency of phosphorus is the only way we have sustainability in the future.
Does that mean that one day phosphate mining will stop because phosphate runs out, and therefore there will be no more fertilizer, and therefore agriculture will be in crisis?
It's less that the phosphorus will run out, it's more that the resources available and the deposits available become less concentrated, and therefore production will peak. We've seen that with oil, peaking of production, and as we go down the other side of that peak, we'll see a difference between supply and demand. So scarcity will bring with it its own problems in terms of costs, in terms of conflict, in terms of adverse consequences socially and economically.
Fortunately for us and the rest of life on Earth, phosphorus cannot be destroyed, but it also cannot be created. You can't make it in a laboratory. Luckily, animals, including us, excrete all the phosphorus we take in as food, so there's a cyclical nature to it. That's why farmers spread manure on their fields. But the modern commercial farmer will spread fertilizer, and generally that's made with mined phosphates. But there are a few problems here. The most obvious is numerical. By the year 2050, it's estimated that there will be 9 billion people on the planet, and those 9 billion will need 70% more food than what's grown today. In order to do that, soils will need to be constantly replenished, hence the rising demand for phosphate-based fertilizers, a demand that rises by about 3% a year. Another is where phosphorus is. It's quite common in the Earth's crust, but rarer in commercially viable deposits that can be mined. Only a few countries have significant reserves of phosphate rocks. China, Syria, and Algeria have them. But way ahead of all of them, with more than 70% of the world's reserves, is Morocco. So where better to go see where the future of the world's food security lies than this corner of Northwest Africa. 3 hours drive from the commercial hub of Casablanca, I arrived at the Khouribga mine in central Morocco, one of several run by the state-owned mining company OCP, which hauls phosphate rock out of huge trenches, processes it, and sends it scores of miles on conveyor belts to the coast for export.
Well, it's going to be an excellent day, I can tell.
Standing in this landscape makes one feel rather
I'm going to leave him for Johnny on to walk up. We'll turn up and play on my show.
not only the largest
I'll leave him for Johnny on.
world, but one of the largest open cast mines in the world. It's 12 kilometers long, it's 70 meters wide, and in places it's 15 meters deep. The noise you can hear is a huge excavator with a bucket on the end of it that's capable of holding 100 tons of rock. There are trucks the size of houses moving in and out of this mine, taking the phosphate away for processing all the time. 35 million tons of phosphate is produced here every year, and this mine has 43% of all global reserves of phosphate, and Morocco as a whole has more than 70%.
Back in Casablanca, I spoke to Nida El Majdu, an executive vice president with OCP.
Phosphate is indeed essential to life, and OCP plays a big role in solving the food security challenge.
How much does it mean to the Moroccan economy, a slice of the Moroccan economy? How important is it?
OCP contributes about 5% of GDP. It also contributes about 20% to Moroccan exports, so I'd say it's quite a substantial player. It's also the first of the country. We employ directly 23,000 people, about 8,000 people indirectly. So I'd say in terms of job creation, so contribution to GDP, so the contribution to the Moroccan exports were pretty substantial.
This is a finite resource. There's only so much phosphate in the Earth's crust. You can't synthesize it. One day it will run out. How do you sustain that in the long term in terms of the amount that you produce?
It is indeed a non-renewable resource, and it is indeed a resource that is essential to life, but we believe that there's plenty of it, even at the current rate of production, will be enough for many, many generations to come.
But the economics of most resources are never straightforward, and phosphates are no different. The vast majority of the world's phosphate reserves have a geopolitical issue which has been unresolved for nearly 3 decades. Western Sahara.
1, 2, 3, dale.
The United Nations describes Western Sahara as a non-self-governing territory, a category that includes many so-called overseas British territories like Gibraltar, Pitcairn Island in the Pacific, and the Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic. Western Sahara was originally called Spanish Sahara and was, as the name suggests, a colony of Spain. But after Spain gave it up in 1975, the administration of Western Sahara was divided between Morocco and Mauritania, which led immediately to conflict between the two and with the Polisario Front, a nationalist movement representing the local Sahrawi people. Mauritania withdrew its claims in 1979, and following a ceasefire agreement in 1991, 2/3 of the territory, almost its entire coastline, most of the mineral resources, and the major cities came under Moroccan control. The rest became the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic under the auspices of the Polisario Front. A referendum on self-determination was promised 28 years ago, but has yet to happen. Stephen Zunes is a professor of politics and international studies at the University of San Francisco. When you talk to many Moroccans, they don't even refer to it as Western Sahara. They call it the southern provinces.
Very much so. If you look at Moroccan maps, there will be no distinction between the two areas. Morocco has long seen it as part of La Grande Maroc, Greater Morocco. They claim that because some Sahrawi tribes some centuries ago pledged fealty to the Moroccan Sultan, therefore it historically belonged to Morocco. They're reclaiming their territory after the colonial powers divided it up between French and Spanish sectors. However, the International Court of Justice in a landmark ruling in 1975 said that whatever merit there may be to such claims, that does not trump the right of self-determination.
Now that Morocco and the SADR are both members of the African Union in the same bloc, in the same club, as it were, there may be some hope that they can at least start a dialogue and get something moving.
Well, there has been dialogue periodically. The United Nations has sponsored talks in the United States and elsewhere, but it really hasn't gone anywhere. The Moroccans are pushing this idea that there will not be a referendum, regardless of the whole series of UN Security Council resolutions to that effect. But they have compromised in the sense that they're no longer claiming that Western Sahara is just another part of Morocco. They offer what they refer to as an autonomy agreement. This Moroccan proposal rules out, by definition, the option of independence. And this is the dilemma that we have right now, is that initially when Morocco invaded, the United Nations unanimously voted that Morocco had to withdraw and grant them their right of self-determination. But they've been passed under Chapter 6 of the UN Charter, not Chapter 7, and that there's no enforcement mechanism because France and the United States, which are allied with Morocco, have basically blocked the United Nations from doing its job, blocked them from enforcing their resolutions.
So when does it end? Where does the whole issue and the problem with Western Sahara stumble on, with Morocco holding most of the cards and the SADR behind the enormous burn embankment and in southwestern parts of Algeria? And is it just going to go on like that forever while the Western world and the rest of the world sort of just concentrate on getting the phosphate up and getting that made into fertilizer to feed the world?
Precedent in terms of international law is very important, and the phosphates are really at the center of this. You may be familiar with the case of a freighter bound for New Zealand that had Sahrawi phosphates. They stopped for refueling in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, and the South African government seized the ship as carrying stolen goods, and this was upheld by the high courts in that country. And
but not everybody's going to do that. I mean, a lot of the phosphates that leave Western Sahara simply are traded around the world and end up in fertilizer wherever. So it's almost as if the rest of the world, maybe South Africa apart, does business in buying the phosphates and making the fertilizer that come from Western Sahara. They're kind of tacitly accepting the situation now.
And that's exactly the case right now, unfortunately. But growing civil society movements have found that this legal question involving phosphates is maybe a soft underbelly.
Of the world's resources, phosphates have become a political hot potato based on where they are and who claims sovereignty over them. And since the 1991 ceasefire, the conflict between the Swahili Arab Democratic Republic, the SADR, and Morocco is now played out in international institutions and the political world, and increasingly in trade. In the past few years, the Polisario Front has targeted shipments of phosphate leaving Western Sahara, not with guns, but with lawyers. As Professor Zunes was saying, a ship was impounded in South Africa, where the High Court ruled the cargo did not belong to the Moroccan state mining company OCP, but to the SADR. Mohammed Kamal Fadel is the representative of the Polisario Front in Australia and New Zealand. He told me the legal strategy is bearing fruit.
It is working very well, with a lot of success.
Very quiet without Facebook. Facebook takes up a lot of time.
Stated that Morocco has no claim to sovereignty over Western Sahara.
I'll just stick to YouTube now. Where it like this, I've got no choice really to shut down my Facebook account.
And since those decisions in South Africa and Panama, no ship.
I don't know why they've done that.
Has gone.
I wasn't doing anything illegal, I didn't think.
In South Africa or through the Panama Canal because of fear of legal action. I think we're going to continue this.
I thought I was trying to help out. I thought I was really trying to help out. Facebook shut my account down, so.
Yes, the court agreed
No,
that the cargo itself was for auction.
Well, there is Pathfinder.
Nobody bid for it, and the cargo went back to the.
You can't get into the agreement anymore, so I said you removed the document.
That wasn't the case. The cargo
Pathfinder.
sold. Those people who bought it sold it again to the OCP.
Did you see any of the money from that? Did the SADR
I took the document
money
off
from the sale of the phosphate?
We did.
Pathfinder long
Creates the principle that money talks, and that
Pathfinder.
if this continues to happen, maybe then the Moroccans may come to a more formal arrangement with you vis-a-vis the money from phosphates.
I think so, and I have also to mention that since these decisions, we managed to convince 16 companies to withdraw from Sahara to stop importing phosphates. Only 4 remain, and one of them is half owned by Morocco. And also, we have noticed that shipping companies are reluctant, and Morocco is quite nervous about this path. We are very optimistic about that.
This is the part of the programme where there should be a response to the whole Western Sahara issue from an official of the Moroccan government. Unfortunately, after weeks of emails and phone calls, they failed to make anyone available. So it's difficult to tell exactly which way the winds of change, if indeed there are any, are blowing in Western Sahara. A year ago, it seemed there was some movement. The United States was saying there should be no more business as usual and political negotiations were continuing. But in May, Horst Kohler, the UN Secretary General's personal envoy for Western Sahara, resigned and negotiations faded away, and he's yet to be replaced. At the same time, the diplomatic advantage appears to be with the Moroccans. The foreign minister was welcomed by the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and President Trump's daughter and special advisor, Ivanka, paid a visit to Morocco in early November. But both Morocco and the SADR are now members of the African Union, and there's some hope the situation can be sorted out through that grouping. But for the moment, it looks as if a lot of the phosphates used to make the fertilizer, used to grow the crops, used to make the food we eat, will continue to come from this region.
What grades did you get at university? Our point there is to alleviate suffering and stress caused by psychological time and split fractured mind. We need to complete the Renaissance. Equal rights can only be achieved with equal knowledge. There is self-knowledge which comes from wisdom, and there is reading and retaining word symbols, sentences and paragraph knowledge. Self-knowledge is a variety of sentence and paragraph knowledge, although the two have been binding. Self-knowledge fulfills your mind, body and soul and enables you to study paragraph knowledge and calculate increasing focus and awareness. It also trains the body to remain calm always. This is a peaceful state with no polarity of hate found in a person lacking wisdom. Sentence or paragraph knowledge is reading a sentence or paragraph until it is remembered. This is a brain study technique. Which teaches you to learn. Reading alone is not studying. It does not mean that you are gaining the knowledge. Reading means that you can recognise symbols. To gain symbols is knowledge. You have to memorise it by heart. Only what is known by heart is retained, and what is necessary to achieve this. This is important to prevent memory impaired illness and suffered at old age. Not anything there today. We'll put on a bit of music at the end.
Your life is just a beginning.
Beautiful heat wave.
For a million years. And if I thought our love was
We're just coming to the end of this John Rankin show. We're going to keep it going. We're going to keep the Emperor Johnny show going. We're even got some music for a while.
That's why I'll always stay around. Yeah, yeah. You are the apple of my eye.
Still glorious Stephen Wonder.
Forever you stay in soul.
I don't think it doesn't run forecasting the station on my station, on my channel.
Because you came to my rescue. And I know that this must be love. I've got so much love be inside of you. Oh, you are the sunshine of my life. Yeah. That's why I'll always stay around.
You are the sunshine of my life.
Forever you stay so yeah, you are the sunshine of my life.
At least today we can smoke. We can smoke on New Year's Eve. That's brilliant. We can smoke today all day. That's what I wanted to do. That's all that I wanted to do for New Year's Eve. I want to do some speed as well, but I can't get any.
Just a girl who says that I am the one, but Jude is not my son. She says I am the one, but Jude is not my son.
Always think twice. Do things twice, do things twice.
She told my baby it's the freak. Then me and show a photo, baby, right? I would like to dance on the floor.
Around, lady.
One love saw me, they get what you do. Don't go around breaking up girls' hearts. Just me. jeans. My love, she's just a girl who says that I am the one. But you is not my son.
My greetings to the English Knowledge Fundamentally. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, 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 yes. Well, Jesus comes down. Yes, yes, we should eat wave. We should live retarded. We should eat wave. Yeah, come on. now. And writing's coming into the studio. Someone understands that real love. I'm searching for that real love. Someone that will depend on real love. And someone cook my dinner, gives a compliment. Or I'm my own chef one day, I've got enough money. I'll set up some matter hands up, and my fortune to me. He will give it to me. He's not stingy, he's not, he's quite generous. Yeah, woo. Caribbean queen said I was the type she wanted to take. Caribbean queen, now we're sharing the same drink, and the hearts that beat anyone. Oh yeah. Come on, let's get down. I lose my good precious love. When I get so excited just from the electric eyes that you can't ignore. Passion burns you like never before. I wasn't certain I was just running my game. There was a purpose from the mind. Caribbean queen, Caribbean
close your eyes, make a wish, and I'm gonna get night. For tonight is your night. You're separate all through the night. For the white, like the fire, girl, yours is like the man. I submit to your demands. I will do anything you need only, and I'll make love to you like you want me to. And I'll hold you tight, baby, all through the night. I'll make love to you when you want me to. And I will not let go of you till we let's go slow. I ain't got nowhere to go. I'm just gonna concentrate on you. Girl, are you ready? It's gonna be a long night. I'm gonna take my love to you. I'll be blessed to be with you. When you want me, I will not let go. You tell me to make it tonight, and tonight, and I will give you right. Just make a wish from your life. Anything that you want, I will give you. Your life, your life. I'll live love, and I will wait. And I'll hold you tight. I'll do the night, I'll get love. When you want me to, will not let go. You tell me to. I'll love you, and I will wait. And I'll hold you tight. I'll do the night, I'll make love. When you want me to, will not let go. You tell me to.
Another Michael Jackson, second Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson rock with you, I believe.
It's your mind. If I can find you, gotta feel that beat, and we can ride the boogie, share that feeling love. Want to ride with you all night, dance you in the sunlight. Ride with you all night, rock the night away. Girl, when you dance, there's a magic that must be love. Just take it slow. We got so far to go, and the feel that beat, to make a right world, yeah. Sweetest melody in love. I want to rock with you all night. Dance you in the sunlight. All night, rock the night away. Bring back the root, let it go. Love so bright, don't let me love
We're going to smoke all day today, all night. We're going to smoke. Yeah, we've got a highway today. We've got it all day. There's some money this week. Doesn't mean how much we earn, so we earn a little bit by hustling and bustling. Hustling up all it. I want to keep hustling. Keep pushing going for entrance. Rock with you, rock the night away. All night, you in sunlight. All night, rock the night. All night, you in sunlight. You don't have to watch We're waiting for Ras Smalls. Ras Smalls will come after 2 o'clock. We got a job with the East Life Massive. All the people that come in the studio, big shout out to them. That like in the Ras Smalls, Splithead, Martin, they're the artists so far. One, two, one, two, one, two, one, two. Yeah. As we get along down with the sound of the underground. With the Emperor Johnny running Babylon. Babylon always wrong with their policy. They always change the budget. Even when you have an adjustment with their VAT. They're not very clever. They make the poor poorer. It's hard to survive. Austerity is really keeping in. That's why I have to work hard. I have to work hard to make some more money. Money is what I need. Just above my house, just above my food, just above my drink. Just so I can relax and have a humble lifestyle. Humble, eating in the capital, getting a chef. But I need the money to get a chef or to go down the couch. The couch food's not very nice, so I probably want to get a chef. I don't know what I want to get. I'll get Barry. Barry can be my chef and my kitchen duty man. And he can do vocals sometimes. And then he can even master the bass. If he masters the bass, I trust him on the bass. He's a civilised man. I'm going to put Junior on the bass. But I can't have Russ Smalls. I don't think. He can't play guitar. Maybe Junior was sounding quite good yesterday on the acoustic guitar. So I'm trying on the bass. Let's try it. Then Martin will do the drums. And then Russ Smalls can you can vocals. Well, Mark, actually Junior can play keyboard. And Junior can play keyboard. Russ Smalls does vocals. And we're going to have some fun tonight. We're going to have some wicked fun. We're 11:01 and came back and we'll do a live show. A live show, we'll do live music. We're 11:01. Live music. The government can't buy their way out of the recession. They should make what they already work. The economy will never grow while you are in debt. The government needs to work towards a fixed fiscal budget. The rich should give all their money to the poor. They'll soon pay it back. You can't eat money. It's a proverb. You can't eat money. You can't eat money. Right, just dwell on that for a minute. The rich could give all their money to the poor. They'll soon earn it back. You can't eat money. The rich could give all their money to the poor. They'll soon earn it back. You can't eat money. Right, a little note of businessmen, wastage, resources, time, distance, company thefts and fraud. We need the government to track each individual for carbon footprint. The image portrayed in media, Satan, not God. We are told in Genesis that we were cursed to be farmers all our lives. Those avoiding that curse should be punished with judgment. Also, we are told by vegetarian. Also, we are told to be vegetarian. So meat farming harmful animals. One, two. My friends checking out my phone. Today we'll smoke all day. We'll get high and high. We'll drink tea and coffee as well. I don't know what we're going to eat later, but it doesn't matter. Well, I'm not eating anything today, maybe. But I'm not hungry. We'll have breakfast. We'll have breakfast, so we're alright. The restaurants there. That's also the building. DJ. All he does is play. This is Johnny Rankin, yeah. This is Johnny Rankin. This is Johnny Rankin. This is Johnny Rankin, yeah. Number one. Professor Johnny Rankin, yeah, he's number one in the studio, number one MC, number one DJ. In the day, all he does is play. All right, everybody, come on, let's get back. Let's get down. As we get down to the below sound, to the chin out, 5, below, 6, later. What a baseline. Right, that's Moses late to his show. So we'll keep out again for Johnny's show coming up. What we'll do, we'll try World Service now.
This report from Paul Holmes. Furious crowds and an American embassy, the largest in the world, under siege. Sources inside the compound say the situation appears to be under control. No one has been evacuated. Directing the protests are some of the country's leading Shiite militiamen. They're backed by Iran and deeply hostile towards America. Tensions rose dramatically over the weekend.
Australia to send the military as bushfire fires rage.
In Iraq and Syria, at least 25 fighters were killed.
Australia to send the military as bushfire rages.
The former boss of Renault
Australia fires military to be deployed to help rescue effort. Australian military aircraft and vessels will be deployed to help emergency services in the fire-ravaged state of New South Wales, and Victoria.
The Lebanese have less than stringent immigration controls, especially when it comes to VIPs, and Carlos Ghosn is no ordinary VIP, despite the fact that he was born in Brazil. He is of Lebanese heritage, and he's one of Lebanon's favourite sons. They've even spoken about him, half jokingly, as being the future president of Lebanon. So he was always going to be welcomed here. There's been no official confirmation from the government that he is actually in Lebanon, and the big question is, well, what ramifications will there be for Lebanon holding on to this man who's a fugitive from the Japanese government, a government which pays hundreds of millions of dollars to the Lebanese government in aid.
A court in Angola has ordered the seizure of assets and bank accounts belonging to Isabel dos Santos. She is the daughter of the former president and is often described as Africa's richest woman. Andrew Harding reports.
Isabel dos Santos is accused of involvement in the theft of $1 billion worth of state assets. That includes an alleged attempt to smuggle 10 million euros into Russia. Her bank accounts have been frozen. The fate of her vast business empire is now in doubt. She was repeatedly denied wrongdoing and reacted to the court order by tweeting that the truth would prevail. News of the order was read out on state television in Angola, a powerful gesture in a country where for decades the Dos Santos family had seemed untouchable.
Anti-government protesters in Hong Kong have formed human chains at major sites across the territory for New Year. There's a heavy police presence, and one of the main highlights, the annual firework display, has been cancelled after police warned of security threats. Australia's biggest city, Sydney, went ahead with its fireworks display, despite calls for money to be used to help tackle raging wildfires. This is the world news from the BBC. Officials in Ethiopia say 6 recently abducted children have been killed by their captors after their families could not meet a ransom demand of around $20,000. On December the 20th, 8 children between the ages of 10 and 16 were abducted by armed men in Gonda city in the Amhara region. A local official told the BBC that 2 managed to escape. The authorities in Indian-administered Kashmir have announced the restoration of text messaging services to the region from midnight when the new year begins. Communications have been severely restricted since Delhi removed the region's autonomous status in August, prompting widespread public anger. A senior official in Kashmir said broadband services in hospitals would also be restarted shortly. A prominent media figure in Pakistan says it will take legal action to clear his name after being accused of raping a film director. Hamid Haroon, the head of the Karachi-based newspaper Dawn, issued the statement after being named on Saturday by the filmmaker Jami Reza. Mr. Raza said Mr. Haroon had raped him 13 years ago. But Mr. Haroon said the allegations were false and malicious. And the French chef Marc Vera has lost his legal bid to force the Michelin Guide to fully explain why it stripped him of its prestigious 3-star status. Here's our Europe regional editor, Mike Sanders.
For Marc Vera, the very notion that he would put English cheese in the saffron souffle was intolerable. He prides himself on using only local produce at La Maison des Bois, his restaurant in the French Alps. He wanted to see the Michelin inspector's workings in full. Michelin called him a narcissistic diva and warned of a chilling effect on all criticism if he won. Dismissing Monsieur Vera's lawsuit, the court in Nanterre noted that he hadn't complained about Michelin's competence when it awarded him 3 stars and had failed to prove any material loss and to pay the costs.
That was Mike Sanders. That is the BBC News.
Hello there, welcome to OS. It's Ben James with you today, just gone 4 p.m. on the final day of 2019 here in the BBC newsroom in London. Happy New Year to you if it's already turned into 2020 wherever you're listening though. And we've been watching the dawn of 2020 in Hong Kong on our screens here in the past few minutes. A light show is continuing on those screens from the skyscrapers on the harbour front. And there have been some fireworks, but not the usual mega display over the water itself. They've been cancelled because of security concerns after the wave of protests this year. I was just checking out the video of last year's fireworks, and the contrast is enormous, rather more low-key, the fireworks and lights I'm watching right now live from Hong Kong. And I can see from journalists tweeting in Hong Kong tonight that protesters are on the streets chanting slogans, clashing with police in some places. Some water cannon have been fired, and we heard about human chains being formed in our news bulletin there as well. We will keep on top of what is going on in Hong Kong tonight. And we're also reflecting on the year just gone on this edition of OS with BBC's China correspondent John Sudworth. Hong Kong, one of his big stories, another the detention camps
chill out
and
or do a
shooting
rational
involving
show?
thousands of Muslims, the ones that
What, a
Chinese
rational show?
authorities have described as vocational schools. We'll discuss how that story's evolved through the years.
I'll stop this one and do yours.
Minutes or so for that. Now then, let's
I'll get
start
the mic
with one
ready.
of the biggest stories of the day, the events in Iraq. Thousands of men belonging to an Iraqi militia have attacked the US embassy in Baghdad. Some breached the perimeter wall and set fire to a guard post before being dispersed by tear gas. This in retaliation to US airstrikes on Sunday that killed 25 members of that militia. Now this group is called Kataib Hezbollah, but who are they?
Take the mic
Why
out.
did it attack them? Here's Insat from the OS team to explain.
Kataib Hezbollah is a Shia Muslim militia based in
I'll
Iraq.
move the seat forward, but
A
there's enough
militia
space.
means a semi-professional armed group made up of
1, 2,
non-professional
1, 2.
civilians, somewhat similar to an army, but one that doesn't necessarily answer to a country or state. Kataib Hezbollah was founded in 2003 by Jamal Jafar Ibrahimi. He also uses the name Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis. He's an Iraqi-Iranian dual national who now leads the group. The group receives financial and military support from Iran and is said to have strong links with elements of Iran's armed forces. After the US invasion in 2003, the group carried out attacks against US and coalition forces across Iraq, and in 2009, the US designated the group a terrorist organization. In 2014, Kataib Hezbollah joined the Popular Mobilization Forces, an umbrella organization of militias. They played a key role in defeating the so-called Islamic State. On Sunday, the US said it conducted airstrikes against 5 of the group's bases in Iraq and Syria. In response, the group's leader said, "The blood of the martyrs will not be in vain."
Thanks to Insat from the OS team for that background. Let's bring in Joanna Saba from BBC Monitoring. It's a bit of the BBC that does what it says on the tin. It monitors local media around the world. She's in Cairo and she's been following events in Iraqi media all day. Joanna, good to have you with us on the programme. It's just gone 7 p.m. in Iraq now. What's the latest we know about what's happening on the ground?
So right now, the latest we've seen is that protesters, or like rather the protest movement in Tahrir Square, so the protest movement that's been going on for months now, is seeking to distinguish itself from the protests that are going on in front of the US Embassy, and they basically disowned them and said that this is, we have nothing to do with this, we're committed to our peaceful methods of protesting and so on. We're also seeing reports that US helicopters have been flying over the US Embassy and warning the people who have gathered around the embassy to leave immediately. US military reinforcements have been sent in.
So those are some of the latest lines you're seeing. How has this evolved in Iraqi media through the day? What have you been seeing?
You can have what's left. There's more than a gram. There's about 2 grams in there.
It's been described differently according to different channels. So there's actually a channel owned by Kataib Hezbollah. It's called the Ittijah, and it's been reporting nonstop about this since the attacks took place on the 29th. Now there are other.
What a shame. That what might mean that we've lost the line to Joanna. No, we got you back.
We'll get your show going, yeah?
So do carry on.
Sorry, yeah. So I was saying.